Racing Towards a Better World, a series of podcasts to guide and support the Irish racing and breeding industry on its sustainability journey, brought to you by the Irish Field and Horse Racing Ireland.
Hello and welcome to Racing Towards a Better World. This is a series of podcasts to guide and support Ireland's horse racing and breeding industry on its sustainability journey. This podcast is brought to you by the Irish Field with the support of Horse Racing Ireland. Now, over the course of this series, you're going to get great information about energy conservation, biodiversity, mindfulness, lots of simple tips on how you can save money and keep your equine business sustainable while also doing your bit for the environment. For a bit of fun, we decided to name each of the 5 episodes after a top-class racehorse. Today's show is called Economics, and it's all about the free resources available to horse keepers who are interested in making improvements to their equine establishments. My name is Mark Costello, and my guests today are Robert Leonard from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Ruth Fennell from Teagasc and Kildalton Agricultural College, and Stephen Robb, Renewables Editor for the Irish Farmers Journal and a reporter on RTE's Ear to the Ground. Now I'm going to start with Stephen, who has a lot of broadcasting experience, more than the rest of us put together. And you may know Stephen from his radio and press and TV contributions on renewable energy. Stephen, the fact that your title is Renewables Editor in the Farmers Journal. I believe you're the first person to have that title. It just goes to show you how mainstream sustainability has become in agriculture. And maybe you can just explain briefly how that came about over the last few years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you were right to point that out. I guess it is. It was a real statement, so it was, by the Farmers Journal whenever we created the renewables portfolio, along with all of our regular sustainability coverage. But, you know, I guess if we look at where the sustainability themes came out of in our society today, particularly in agriculture, we really came through the last decade. You can nearly call it a decade of expansion with quotas going and whatnot. And it was all about more. It was pushing on, it was driving on, it was getting more output. Look, you nearly could say that came to an end to a certain degree towards the end of the last decade in 2019 with the publication of the first Climate Action Plan. And we really doubled down on that then in 2021 with the Climate Act, which was signed and sealed and set in course a legally binding target to reduce our emissions by 51% by 2030. And that was really in line with kind of where Europe was going. So at that point, you can nearly argue it became real. So it did across all of our sectors. In 2022, we would have seen carbon budgets introduced, and the Climate Action Plan. In 2023, we would have seen our sectoral targets set. For agriculture, it was 25% reduction based on 2018 levels by 2030. So really, really challenging. So I guess now everything really that we do in agriculture is almost seen through that lens of sustainability, but ultimately how can we reduce our emissions and I suppose reduce our impact on the environment. That doesn't necessarily mean closing doors in agriculture. I think that was a fear amongst farmers, so it was for quite a long time. That's not the way it is. And I think practically all farmers understand the need to reduce emissions and improve our sustainability while still staying, economically viable and making money, because that's what farmers are here to do.
I think it hopefully will be easier for equine farmers because they have less animals on the land, a lower stocking rate, and they don't have the same emissions. But of course, they still need power and they still need water. So are you seeing much pushback now from farmers, or they've had to embrace these changes, I guess? Do you see big changes on the ground when you're out on farm walks?
Yeah, I suppose, just to comment on that equine comment, I suppose the equine industry, it's an industry, they're businesses at the end of the day. And our drive to reduce emissions, it's not just specific to agriculture, it's right across transport, it's electricity, it's industry, it's buildings, public sector, etc., all of which has an impact on every single business, including the equine business. For example, the diesel, which is put into the jeeps to bring horses to shows or whatever, we're increasing the biofuel blending obligation in both of our fuels actually at the moment, petrol and diesel. So they might know that's happening, but it is happening. So it's feeding through to absolutely everything. I suppose how are farmers' perceptions towards sustainability now? Well, look, I think there was... Look, dare I say it, at one point maybe sustainability might be seen as a bit of a dirty word at one point, because it was kind of perceived as ultimately impacting the farm business in a negative way. Personally, I think that's changed. So it has now, because some of the measures, many of the measures which farmers are adopting or maybe already doing without realising it to reduce their emissions, it's good farmer practice and ultimately will help that farm improve its bottom line. Some basic examples would be incorporating clover into the sward, trying to fix their own nitrogen, ultimately reducing the amount of chemical nitrogen they use. Same for on the tillage end of things, growing nitrogen fixing cover crops or protein crops, or maybe chopping straw and getting a payment for it, or the increasing use of renewables, improving soil fertility, protected area, etc., etc. I think it's much easier for a farmer to buy into adopting measures whenever it's pretty clear that it will have a positive impact on the bottom line. Not everything does, I'll hold my hands up and say that, but it's certainly a much easier message to sell when it does.
Well, I'm going to, in a minute, talk to Robert from the department about the TAMS scheme, and I know that Ruth will also be explaining some of the supports that Teagasc offer as well. But in your view, Stephen, is the department, have they helped farmers along there? Have you found that there's good support coming from the department in terms of making grants available to farmers who want to be more sustainable?
Yeah, look, I guess, with a department, they have a very difficult job to do, because, what we're asking farmers to do, it really is a step change on where policy and advice and kind of direction of travel has gone up until this point. But the likes of the TAMS scheme, the introduction of solar and a whole range of other renewable technologies into that scheme has been fantastic. It's a hands up, it's a phenomenal scheme, 60% capital grant. No other cohort of society gets that. But I guess, there are other measures which are going to come down the line, which will certainly be less popular, which will have to be implemented by the department. Maybe changes that we're going to see to the nitrates directive. I can't imagine it being that much of a happy outcome for a lot of the farmers who might be listening to this. So yeah, look, they're doing their best. Could they go further? Absolutely, they could go further. It comes back to that point where it's very easy to sell a message whenever there's a turn in it, so there is, and that's maybe just the way I'm thinking of things, and kind of that business orientated direction. So that's maybe not necessarily just the Department of Agriculture, but the other departments, the Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment. There's a lot of really good schemes that have been developed, but they're just not right for farmers. There's just not enough in them. If a farmer is going to invest in a wind turbine or a small scale solar farm, for example, there's schemes out there to help them do that. But the tariff rates which we're introduced are just not high enough to make it worth their while. And at the end of the day, we're all business people here, and we do have to make a return on our investments, and that comes back to that message. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, are the government's departments doing enough? They're certainly doing a lot. Okay. They could probably do more. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Robert, I look across the department here.
What we really want from today is just to get people a few of those contact points so they can just get started and know who to turn to and find out a bit more about it and not be bamboozled by filling in forms.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of really, really good measures out there which people could start looking into today. Well,
I'm hoping you'll just listen to what Robert says and what Ruth says, Stephen, and I'll come back to you at the end, and maybe you could talk about a few other grant schemes that are available to equine farmers outside of TAMS. I know you have massive knowledge on those things. But TAMS, TAMS, is the big one, and we have the right man here to tell us all about it. Robert Leonard, you joined the department over 20 years ago, I understand. You have an engineering background, and your role, among many, I'm sure, is to provide technical specifications for schemes such as TAMS. So my first question, actually, and this is for people who aren't familiar at all with it, maybe just tell us what TAMS stands for and how long it's been going.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I'm delighted to be here to be able to put the presentation in on TAMS. TAMS is the Target Agricultural Modernisation Scheme. So it sounds very long-winded, but it's really the capital investment scheme for farms, on farms. So anyone who is a farmer who has a BIS application with minimum of 5 hectares, once they've applied, don't have to have any entitlements, they're eligible to apply. So it's open, and then also a requirement to have a department identifier.
You mentioned the BIS application there again. I'm sorry to dumb this down, but just explain that is the basic income
support scheme.
Support scheme, and that's open to anyone who's listening who has horses on a reasonable amount of land. Are they eligible to apply for that every year?
Anyone who has land is eligible to apply. Yeah,
that's the equivalent of the used to be called a single farm payment, or something like that.
That is it.
And once you apply for that, so what I want to find out is TAMS has only been open to equine for a couple of years, is that right?
Yes, and we did grant aid equine investments a number of years ago under previous schemes, under the Farm Rights Management Scheme, but this is the first time this year, or in TAMS 3, that there's been a significant number of equine investments. Under the previous round we did grant aid horse stocks, but this time it's the first time in a number of years that we've done actually housing and the other types of investments.
Stephen mentioned there you can get up to 60% funding for stuff. So is that, and I'm not sure if I'm right about this, is 90,000 the maximum value, and you could get 60% back?
Yes, you can get up to, I suppose, just to set it up, I suppose, at the background a bit more, it's divided, the TAM's divided into 10 different schemes, depending on what type of investment, where you're coming from, whether it's under the animal welfare, which is the majority of farmers, and for equine people, but there's also for young farmers and women farmers, there's separate schemes, and the 60% grant rate for the housing, and then there's the solar scheme as well, also at 60%, which are all open to equine farmers. And I suppose the specific equine investments, which you need to have an equine registration, premises registration, and have a minimum of 3 equines recorded on your last census. So you can get up to 90,000 under the animal welfare scheme, young farmer scheme, or a women farmer scheme, depending on which you qualify for. And then there's also a further 90,000 under the solar scheme. So the solar has a separate investment ceiling to the other schemes.
And I know in a later podcast where we'll be talking to a racehorse trainer who's availed of that solar scheme. But it's starting to sound like there's a lot of acronyms and forms to fill in. Taking your department hat off it for a second, is it a complicated process? Do I need to get an agricultural advisor to help me with this, or could most farmers, people in equine like to think they're pretty clever now, so there's a few quid going, I'd say, would most people be able to manage this themselves, do you find?
Depending on what you're applying for, you could actually do it yourself if you're focused. The systems have been designed to be as simple, as straightforward as possible to try and fill in. There is a lot of background documentation available, so if you're prepared to sit down and read the documentation for a few minutes, you will be able to actually complete the full application yourself. I suppose for simple things like mulchers, which equine farmers may be interested in, it's a very simple application system. So you definitely do those sort of mobile equipment yourself, or horse stocks. Very easy to do. If it's a more full American barn or something like that, maybe I'd be recommending to get an advisor just to help you, guide you through the full details and making sure you're putting in the correct dimensions. While it's all there available in the documentation, it can sometimes be helpful to get someone who's had a bit of experience to actually guide you through it.
Well, I was interested to know how many equine, I think it's 2 years is going in equine, 2023, maybe a bit longer, this particular scheme, and how many equine farm applications has the department seen so far, do you know, roughly?
So specifically, I suppose for specific ones where there was an equine involvement, there's been 512 applications from 410 different individuals. So that's over 400. So that's a good uptake for 410. And that's just related to equine specific investments. So it doesn't account for someone, maybe an equine farm applying for likes of manure pit or some other investments or solar, those which we wouldn't be picked up in those numbers.
So what are they applying for typically? What kind of stuff are they getting done?
So a lot of fencing, but housing. Yeah. So with the fencing, we cover post and rail fencing, horse tape, the specialised horse mesh fence, so the high tensile mesh fence. So a full range of fencing options. Yeah. The housing, we have American barns, loose housing, and inline stables, along with the tack rooms and feed stores along with them. So had nearly 50 applications in relation to housing so alone. So there's a good
stables.
Yeah. And also then training facilities. So that covers likes of gallops, exercise areas.
Jumps, you were saying.
Not actual directly jumps, but it's the training facilities, the lunging areas, and then horse walkers.
Oh.
So there's been a lot of interest, and I suppose we've seen a lot of interest in the exercise areas. And I suppose they've been very popular, and then also handling facilities, horse stocks, and also loading bays for horses. That was the thing to remember. The horse stocks and loading bays, they're under what we call the farm safety scheme, and they're eligible at 60% grant rate.
Yeah. And how long does it typically take to process a claim, or even from start to finish? I know it depends on the building now. If I was building stables, it could take another year, but maybe you could run me through a typical project from start to finish.
Yeah, I suppose just it'll probably helpful to give a bit more background on the way the TAMS operates. It operates in tranches, what we call it, tranches, where we assess the applications every 3 months. So we take in what applications have been submitted up to a particular date. The current tranche that's open is open till the 6th of September. So at that point, we will assess what applications have been submitted. The initial assessment and going approval takes about 2.5 months. And so from once the tranche closes, it'll be about 2.5 months, you have your written approval. So it's be important, if you're doing a building works, not to commence any work until you have that written approval. Mm-hmm. And then, so you have then a year, at least you have 12 months the initial approval is for 12 months. Okay. And then, but there's a possibility of looking for an extension for the 6 months if you need it. So if you're a lot of investments fencing, you'll have it done and application easily submitted. And then once this claim is submitted, we review it. It'll be typically done within 2 months, and you'll have the payment. So I suppose it's fairly straightforward. I suppose the big thing is to make sure you do read the specifications. Department has standards, effectively, what we call them specifications, for all the different structures, which sets out what we expect. And it's important.
Concrete stuff like that, isn't it? Standard.
Concrete, steel, for the building steel sizes, for the American barns partition heights, things like that. There are quite a lot of details, and even the thickness of the materials. Mm-hmm. Is to make sure that the structure is robust, will last. I suppose we're aiming with them to be in good conditions for at least 20 years. So you have I know some people say they can be a bit high standard, but it's there to make sure it's a safe, reliable structure that you can use for at least 20 years with minimal maintenance work. So it's there to set a standard, and I suppose it's good value for money. It's making sure it lasts in there. So that's the important thing. And do follow the specification. Yeah.
No cowboys is the message. Probably enough. I'm going to call in Ruth in a moment, but actually just going back on the criteria again, there's a specific criteria about the amount of land you have to make an application. Can you just remind me of that? And do you have to own the land?
I suppose to apply, you must have a minimum of 5 hectares applied for under BIS. So that can be leased, rented, owned. So it's going to be 5 hectares applied for. You don't have to be eligible for actually any entitlements or payment. It's just actually have submitted an application under the basic income support scheme. So don't worry if you haven't done it before. It can be all done online. It's straightforward. It's fairly straightforward. So once you've made the application, that's what we look for. And then also it's important that you have completed the equine census in the year prior to application. And that you have a minimum of 3 equines. And that's, a foal is an equine, so it's any equine. It doesn't have to be a full adult horse. So we're flexible that way.
I'm sure all of this is on the department website. If there's a particular equine section, I assume there is.
I suppose
there as well.
There is a particular TAMS section even. So if you it's on at www.gov.ie/TAMS. And that'll be all the TAMS information there at that website.
Thank you, Robert. I'm just dialing in Ruth Fennell here. She's down in Waterford. Ruth is with Teagasc and Kildalton College. And I know she's very interested in TAMS. Hi, Ruth. It's Mark here. I'm in the studio with Robert and with Stephen. We've just been chatting there about TAMS, and Robert was running us through the criteria and the amount that you can claim on it. But one thing that I think I know I spoke to you about a little earlier before we came on the air, as it were, it was about traceability, which is a big buzzword now in the equine world, because the ownership of horses isn't always as clear-cut as it should be, not like, say, with cattle. And of course, if you are applying for TAMS, you need to first apply to the department for, is it a BIS, Robert, or that's how you start off, isn't it? And you fill in the census.
You need an equine premises number or herd number to complete the BIS. So, yeah.
So what would the first step be, Ruth, in that process if you're not registered at all? You've never filled in an equine census.
So the first point for anybody that keeps equines is that they register for an equine premises number. So under the SI 113 of 2014, there's a legal requirement for anybody that keeps horses to register for an equine premises number. And the purpose of that is really from a Department of Agriculture point of view, that they have a location for where the horses are kept within the country if there is a disease outbreak.
Brilliant. And so, look, that's really completes the circle then. You know, you not only are you taking the first step on your sustainability journey, but you're also, you know, at the very least, you are fulfilling your legal obligations to in terms of traceability by doing that. Ruth, you're a collaborative farming specialist with Kildalton, with Teagasc, I should say, based in Kildalton Agricultural College. I know you previously worked as a business and technology advisor with Teagasc as well. Is sustainability a very big topic in Teagasc and Kildalton?
I think, to be honest, it's a hot topic everywhere at the minute. I suppose from our perspective, we generally would look at sustainability from a three-pronged approach. So we would look at first the economic side of it and the financial viability of it. We would also look at the environmental aspects that's associated with that. And we would also then look at the societal impact, which is basically your social alliance or the public perception and approval of the practices that we do. And that would relate to all agricultural practices, whether that's dairy or beef or sheep or the equine side of it as well too. So look, it is a very hot topic, but it's not just a lot of people think about sustainability and they look at the environment. There's actually a lot more to it than just protecting the environment, which is obviously hugely important. But there are other aspects that we look about it when we refer to sustainability.
And can you tell me a little bit about what Teagasc offers specifically in terms of support to the equine sector?
I suppose if we refer first to the general side of it, we do have advisors that are based on the signpost programme. So there are 20 of those throughout the country, and their target is to really look at reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We also then have 20 advisors in relation to the ASSA programme. So that's the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory programme. And their work focuses particularly on areas where there may be water quality issues and how they address those. And in addition to that, then we also have water quality advisors. If we refer then specifically to the equine side of the house, Teagasc have 2 equine specialist advisors. That's Wendy Conlon and Sean Keane. And in addition to the 2 specialists that we have advisors within each of the 13 area units that have been assigned a specific role to assist equine farmers with queries that they may have, whether that's in relation to general farming and farming practices or whether that's in relation to grant applications and that. So they would deal specifically with clients that would relate to horses, and those advisors would receive additional support and training then from the equine specialists within the unit. In addition to that then, as of last year, we had our first equine farmer assigned to the signpost programme. So that's Paul Beecher, who's based in Tallow in Waterford. He's from Woodhill Stud, and he's what we refer to as a Teagasc signpost farmer. So they would look at all the aspects in relation to sustainability on Paul's farm, and they would document those in relation to whether it's on the business model, on whether the health side of things, on the grassland management, on soil fertility, and also on the animal health side and the welfare side of it then as well too.
Very good. You mentioned there that, I think that in terms of grant application, am I right in thinking then if there are equine farmers listening, breeders, horse owners, horse trainers listening, and they're interested in making a TAMS application, can Teagasc help them with that specifically?
They certainly can. As I mentioned, there is advisors within each of the units that would have knowledge and experience around completing those grant applications. They would need to be Teagasc clients in order to avail of those services. There are also private consultants throughout the country that can also offer that service as well too. So look, there's huge resources and support available for anybody that is interested in doing that. I suppose some of the more basic grant applications if a farmer wanted to complete those themselves, they could do that. But obviously they'd want to be comfortable with using the IT, because this is an online application. So often people will seek additional assistance to complete those grants.
Mm-hmm. I was on the Teagasc website briefly earlier this week. There seemed to be a huge amount of resources there, videos as well. I think there you organise grass walks as well. Maybe you could just remind us of the website address, and is there anything else on there that we haven't touched on that are worth looking at for people who just want to take that first step?
Look, there's a huge resource there. If they go to teagasc.ie and then /equine, that'll bring them directly to the section. There is a specific area that deals with sustainability on the website. As you mentioned there, they held 2 very successful farm walks dealing with pasture management. They were workshops that were done in June of this year, and they were in collaboration with the ITBA and the Irish Equine Centre. In addition to that, they have a new collaboration that was recently just launched, which is called the ECHO programme, that deals with equine collaboration for health and outreach. And that's done in association with Teagasc, Caffrey and Enniskillen, the Irish Equine Centre, University of Limerick and UCD. And the purpose of that is to provide support and education relating to the sustainable health protection of equines. So there's a lot of projects in the pipeline as well too that are coming up. So there's a huge amount of information there. And as I said, Wendy Conlon and Sean Keane are our 2 equine specialists and are available to offer assistance and support to anybody that's looking for it on the equine side of things.
Ruth, that has been very informative. Yes, a shout out to Sean Keane and Wendy Conlon, who couldn't join us on the call today, but you've been more than helpful in everything you've told me there today. So thank you very much. Again, teagasc.ie /equine is a very good place to start. Ruth, thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Well, that was very, very interesting. Stephen, I'll just go back to you there. I know I'd need another podcast to go through all the other schemes available to you. And if we start talking about anaerobic digesters, we're going to need 2 hours. But maybe you can just touch on a few other things outside of TAMS and maybe the supports that Ruth mentioned. Are there anything else that works right across agriculture that equine farmers could chase up?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you thought the conversation was bad so far for acronyms, wait till you see what's coming your way. But look, I guess just to touch on maybe something we would have written about in the Farmers Journal recently, which really, I suppose, drives home kind of the message around energy and sustainability. So the EU's latest target for total renewable energy by 2030 is 42.5%. So that is everything. That's not just electricity, which we only really hear about. It's transport, it's heat, it's everything. Ireland's target was 34%, but that's actually being increased as well in line with European rules. Currently, Mark, about 81% of our total energy on this island comes from fossil fuels. So we have a hell of a journey ahead of us.
Don't depress us.
By 2030. Yeah. I'm building. We're an island nation and we're critically exposed. So we are in terms of our energy security. We're really supplied through interconnectors and gas pipelines. And we're spending billions upon billions a year on those fossil fuels. So where's the opportunity? To me, the opportunity for farmers and those in the equine industry is to try and get a slice of that themselves. And there are schemes out there which are designed to help do that. They need to be tweaked. Every single one of them needs to be tweaked to make them a little bit better. And this isn't TAMS, this is other schemes. So I'm briefly going to run through just a handful of them. May be applicable, may not be applicable, depending on the circumstances. So if you're in the equine industry and you have a need for heat of some kind, there are grants available under what's called the Support Scheme for Renewable Heat, SSRH. It's administered by the SEI, so you can get capital grants of up to 40% for heat pumps. So that's ground source, water source, air source heat pumps, or you can get an ongoing operational tariff for biomass boilers. So basically you'll be paid over 15 years for changing to a biomass boiler and using biomass instead of fossil fuels. The next one would be maybe the microgeneration scheme, which we didn't really touch on, but basically if you have solar panels on your roof, you have a legal right essentially to get paid for whatever surplus electricity you don't use, you export back to the grid, and you get a market rate. Then I suppose the next step up from that would be, well, it's the non-domestic microgeneration grant is what it's called. It's administered through the SEI. So if you've already availed of TAMS or you don't qualify for TAMS for solar, well, there is up to 162,000 available for solar PV systems. But I think it works in and around maybe 30 to 40% versus 60% or so for TAMS. So you can see where your preference should be first of all. Moving on from that, and this is where it begins to get really interesting. We're into the kind of income earning space in electricity. SRES, so the Small Scale Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. So this is designed to allow businesses or farmers to build small-scale solar farms or install wind turbines off their own and get paid a support tariff for 15 years. And then after the 15 years, you can go to the market and enter into a PPA. That has the potential to be a really good scheme. It's open, it's live, but the tariff rates are quite low for wind. You might be able to make it work for solar. So I'm chatting maybe a 5 or 10 acre solar farm if someone in the equine industry wants to diversify, and maybe they're beside a substation or an adequate line. Difficult to make the numbers stack up because the tariffs are so low, but not impossible. Next step up from that, Mark, is the RESS scheme, so the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. So this is for the large-scale renewable electricity developments that you're seeing popping up, so largely solar farms and wind farms. Look, solar farms, we're in a solar boom at the moment, and a lot of people aren't happy about it in the agricultural industry. And
I can tell you, equine is quite a controversial topic.
Yeah, and it's really an interesting one because it's nearly the opposite, so it is, of some of the points I've made so far, and that they put together quite a good scheme. Mm-hmm. So they did a very good workable scheme for the solar industry, and the solar industry, they flocked to it in their droves. And that's why we're seeing a utility scale solar boom, and planning rates are quite high, and really the bigger the better. So it is when it comes to solar farms. So that's why we're seeing so many of them pop up all around the country, because partially because there's a scheme behind it, but also there is an appetite out there for cheap solar power. I will not dwell on this, but there is a question of whether this has really been thought out from a land use point of view, because the comments that you're probably getting, certainly the comments that I get back, is that we're using top quality agricultural land for. We're
here to talk about sustainability, and they'll say if there's going to be solar farms all over Kildare for Tipperary, it's not sustainable for us to have ours. So it is. There's certainly a limit to it.
So I think there's certainly solar hotspots popping up around the country. Yeah. I fear that in a decade or 2 decades time, we're going to look back at this policy and think, well, why didn't we just think this out a little bit better? I'm not saying no to solar farms, because we do need renewable electricity, but there are concentrations around the country where it is becoming an issue, a real big issue.
Donegal is a good county. You get much sunshine there.
Wind is our thing. Wind is our baby, but we just don't have the electricity network up there, which again is another podcast altogether. And then, so that's kind of the electricity space. And then lastly, so anaerobic digestion. So there are policies coming out to try and get this bloody industry up and going, because we have big targets specifically for anaerobic digestion.
This is paying for your waste. Is it the waste that farmers and indeed the equine business is generating? This will be taken away and powering a whole town.
Exactly. So basically taking organic waste and breaking it down, releasing the gas, which is methane, and capturing it and turning it into biomethane and putting it into the national gas grid to replace natural gas. How does that impact the equine industry? Well, there are developers who are actively engaging with the equine industry at the moment for their manure, because these things they're large, they take a lot of organic waste, they take a lot of feeding, they take a lot of slurry, they take a lot of crops in some cases, and horse manure, because the straw is quite fresh, if you can process that straw adequately, it's quite good from a yield point of view. So, and some of you'd know better than me, some of the players in the equine industry will be producing large quantities of horse manure. So it's a good feedstock source. So basically if you're approached, I certainly wouldn't pay them anything. If anything, they should be paying you. Yeah. So they should, because it's it's their fuel source. And if you want a source of organic fertilizer back in the form of digestate, you could probably work out a deal there as well. So that's some of the schemes which are there at the moment, and which will impact the equine industry for better or for worse.
Well, one website you mentioned, and maybe you can think there if there's anywhere else they can read a bit more about those, but you mentioned the SEAI, Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, and I know in a later podcast we have Cormac McCarthy, and he gives some great information on some of those schemes and how easy it is to save money. Like, in minutes, he said, if you just watch some of our videos, you'll save typically 10% and so on. But it's worth listening to that one if you can find it. So that's their Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, SEAI. Have a search for them. Are there any other sites where I should go to look up those things?
Well, there is a certain site, so there is called the Irish Farmers Journal. So there is come on, man, fly the flag here. No, look, personally, I would field calls on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. So I would from those who have either been approached by developers or just interested in finding out a little bit more about any of the systems which we spoke about or the schemes which we spoke about in this podcast. Obviously, Teagasc, SCEI, also good sources of info. But, really what I find is the more people you talk to in this industry about whatever, whether it's a heat pump or whether it's solar panels or whether it's a land lease for a solar farm or whatever, just talk to as many people as you can, and that includes suppliers. If you're looking at a solar PV system, don't just get one quote from one supplier. You'll get multiple quotes and quiz them about the system, about the warranties, about the guarantees, about their track record. And especially in the case of solar, if you're expecting that solar PV system to still be operational in 25-30 years time, which some of the warranties will guarantee, well then you better make sure that your solar supplier is going to be there in 25-30 years time, and always keep things like that in the back of your mind. Brilliant.
Okay, I think that's everything. A lot to take in there. I want to thank you for listening, and thanks certainly my guests Stephen Robb, Ruth Fennell and Robert Leonard from the department. You can find out more about Horse Racing Ireland's sustainability strategy, which is called Racing Towards a Better World, at hri.ie/sustainability. And please look out for more podcasts in this series on the Irish Fields podcast channels. Bye for now. Thank you.